Lead with Legacy, the official podcast of IOL Global. Here, we will explore leadership that outlives titles and trends. Through conversations with faith-based and marketplace leaders, we will discuss integrity, conviction, and purpose. To learn more about us, visit us at iolglobal.com.
Hello, welcome back to the Lead with Legacy podcast. We're so excited to have you guys on with us today. Super big day for all of us. We have Dr. Casey LaFrance on again, which was planned because, let's see, what was the day? The 15th. I'm going to let you tell what happened, Dr. LaFrance, and we're going to kind of just have a little celebration, a little conversation about what we got going on. I want to thank you for being here. We got Dr. Chambers here, who's the founder of IOL, and we've got Sloane Lott, who's the director of operations for IOL. And we're just super excited to kind of come on and have a little conversation today. And we thank y'all for listening to us. Please do like and subscribe on whatever your favorite platform is. We are everywhere now, thanks to Sloane. And so I'll just let you take it, Dr. LaFrance.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back. It's great to be on the podcast. I guess the big news is last week we dropped our book. Within 91 hours, we were ranked number 1 in 3 categories in Amazon's marketplace. So I think we had a pretty effective drop. And what it signaled to me is all of the buildup that IOL had done, all the marketing, all of the promotion, and sort of the sneak peeks that you guys had given had helped out immensely. And then the way that you position the book, because I think it taps into the dimensions that you guys selected for listing the book. There are technical project managers that need to learn more about communication. Yeah. There are people in project business that often don't realize the return on investment that comes from simply listening and avoiding errors on the front end. And then generally with project managers, I think this is good because, again, it's framework agnostic. It plays well with anything that you use, because all you're doing is asking questions and you're presenting value in ways that you're already familiar with. You just have to translate it into interpersonal relationships. And the last thing I'll say is, and I'm so grateful and so humbled by this. I was blown away, never expected it. I'm very grateful. But the last thing I'll say is it's also trending in communication. We hit, I think, in the top 18 or so in the communication subfield. And that speaks again to the utility of the book beyond project management, beyond change management, beyond nonprofits, public sector entities, manufacturing. Everywhere that there are people, there are going to be relationships. And a lot of times what we think is task conflict, right, is really relational conflict. And if we resolve those task conflicts and learn to work together, a lot of the relational conflict that we're experiencing diminishes, or maybe even takes care of itself.
We're so excited. We're thrilled. I want to do like a little round robin since we have everybody here. So not everybody knows that this is some of the work that we do through IOL. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process. You and I met a long time ago on LinkedIn. We've talked about that in the last podcast. So if you haven't heard that one yet, go back and find that one, and you kind of learn about how we met and how we know each other. And then when I decided to relaunch IOL, you kind of reached out and said, hey, let's do some work together. And I was slammed. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And I kept saying, I'm so sorry, and putting you off. And then finally I was like, hey, we have it. We can do it now. I have people. And so we started talking about this book that you had written and making it come to life. And so we had some meetings about what does that look like? What does that transition into? And how is our team equipped to do that? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And how that process went. I want Dr. Chambers to kind of tell us his expertise in that, and then Sloane's expertise and how that cycle kind of went. Because we started with of course your manuscript, and then Dr. Chambers and you did some work on it, and then Sloane came in, and then I kind of came in on the back end. So Dr. Chambers, why don't you go ahead and start with that?
Sure. Yeah, it was a real great privilege to work on this project, primarily because of my background in organizational development. There's always been this issue for all the years I've been doing it, I think 40 something years, where communication is really the key. And when I saw this idea that you can get value, at least you can get you can get quantifiable value from listening, I had never seen anyone tackle that before. So it was really pretty exciting for me. The process on my side is pretty simple. Over the years, I've helped write and edit countless numbers of books and articles and dissertations and so on. So, Dr. Casey and I got together. I looked at the manuscript. The main thing for me, which is frightening, is I have to get inside his head, find out what's going on in there, and try to find, for me, the number one thing is to find the voice of the author. Mm-hmm. So as an editor, you got to get that voice. So we had conversations back and forth, watched some of his podcast stuff. So that just helps me to get, what he's talking about, the content, but also the author voice. And because if I make any suggestions or changes on our side, it has to reflect him, not us. It's not about us in the first place. So anyway, that was process that we do. And then we dive into the editing. Most people who write a book are not authors. This is not their profession. They're not Stephen King or, whoever, Louis L'Amour or somebody that writes 100 books. They're people who have great ideas. They have solutions to problems, and they're trying to get that out and get it on paper so other people can take value from it. So that's really it. And it was a real joy working on it. I had, liberty as the editor to work through things and find that voice. And the more I got into it, the more excited I was about it, because I could just think back in my career of all the times I could have used this with corporations where they just don't listen. And so this idea of getting value from listening to systems, different systems within an organization, I think is going to really be helpful to people.
Yeah. Sloane, let's talk a little bit about your role in it.
Absolutely. So after Dr. Chambers did the first round of revision, it came to me. And part of my area of expertise is just overall readability. Is the technical reader going to know what's going on? Is the typical reader going to know what's going on? And so I just really wanted to make sure that it remained Dr. LaFrance's voice and that it was consistent. The great thing about this is Dr. Casey and I had spent a lot of time back and forth, emailing, LinkedIn, speaking, so I knew his voice already, and that made it so much easier. But in one of the early meetings, one of the things that stood out to me is that he said, when we were talking about legacy in another podcast, he said he wants his daughter to be able to read it when he's gone and hear his voice and say, I know that guy. And so that was very concrete for me. I wanted to make sure that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing as editors, but would his child be able to look back on that as an adult and say, I know that guy. So that was one of the driving things about it. Like Dr. Chambers said, loved the book, loved the material. Listening, it seems so simple, and yet we're not doing it. Dr. Casey has said it's framework agnostic, but it's also sector agnostic, right? What sector are we going to have success in if we don't listen to those around us? So I think for anybody who's hearing about, he hit number 1 in project management or technical project management, whatever sector you're in, whatever level you are within your organization, this book will benefit you. And he's got some great case studies that show how the return of on investment for listening shows up. And it's really neat. I love his examples and his case studies, and I really think that the audience is going to enjoy it as well.
Yeah, super agree. And not just because we're the team working on it. We had the extreme honor of being the team to work on it. And hopefully we've got some other things that we're going to be working on this summer as well. But I think to speak to what Dr. Chambers and Sloane were saying, it is so much easier and so much better as the editing, proofing, technical team behind the scenes to work alongside someone who is so genuine and so easy to work with and who is really, really so brilliant in their field and who is willing to kind of move a little bit with it, like, and take the feedback and take it well, so that we can say, hey, we should probably do this a little different or this a little different, and kind of have those good conversations because you are so good at listening. And you've taught all of us a lot about that in this process. So I don't want to give away the whole thing because they need to go buy the book, right? But let's talk a little bit about the fox. Don't tell the whole thing because the story is in here. And so you should go buy the book and you should read it. But Dr. LaFrance, tell us a little bit why the fox, Finnick fox.
So there are a couple of reasons, and if you'll hold the book up one more time, Amanda, if you notice, the fox is surrounded in what at first blush might look like a halo. It might look like we canonized this fox, but we didn't. That's actually an allusion to the Foxfire Center in North Georgia. And Dr. Chambers, Amanda, I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's in Clayton, Georgia, and they publish the Foxfire anthologies. They still run a lot of mountain tradition kind of stuff. And so the inspiration behind the book had a lot to do with my work in Appalachia with people like Helen Lewis. And that's my way of paying homage to my region. The fox also is something I encountered in regional stories. There are Cherokee stories about foxes that are illustrated in concepts in the book. And the idea is thinking cleverly, but also thinking of new ways to do things that are beyond what you're seeing everybody else do. And then I've got so much just in my head from what you guys have said. I'm trying to remember it all at once. But the coolest thing about the link to Helen is you notice that there are people in that book like Barbara Romzik, Helen Lewis, Jane Addams, and to see the production team, the heavy lifting on producing this book was done primarily by women.
I didn't even think about that.
It's really special, right? It's showing that the message and the path that was blazed by these people is now being taken up. We have a female CEO who's running this operation and publishing the #1 book in project management, right? How about that?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. So we talked about Dr. Chambers and what he does and Sloane and what she does. So what I do in this process, because we do have kind of a threefold process within the IOL team specifically, but of course want to work very closely with you as the author. But what I do is I kind of come in on the tail end. They've done all the heavy work. Thank the Lord for that. All of you have done the heavy work. And then I kind of come in a little bit as the bad guy on the back end and go, hey, this, we got to change this. We got to switch this. But not to an extreme extent, really just more, I'm like the grammar police. And so I've been doing a lot of that. And then I got the honor on this book. And thank you so much for the freedom to kind of work with your idea and pick your brain and listen to your ideas, because I think the layout came out so beautifully on this book. I personally am so proud of the way that it just flows. It lays out. There's a fox inside, which is super fun. And it just came out really, really beautifully. And I thank you for the autonomy to work on that, because a lot of people will get, they're so close to the project and so close to the book, and they have their ideas, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you can kind of let somebody else listen to that and kind of create from what you're saying, I think that what we were able to achieve is a really, really beautiful product that we were able to take to market again and very quickly reach some #1 status that kind of blew us all away. So it's really, really beautiful. And I don't think it's as easy or as achievable when you don't, as a team, have the autonomy to kind of work with the product to try to make it what the idea is. And you are so good to work with. I cannot speak highly enough.
Thank you.
You are just amazing to work with. And that does not mean, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that you cow down to everything that we say, right? It means that you have your ideas and you share them, and then you allow us to have our ideas and share them, which is the hallmark of a phenomenal leader. And it has been a true honor to work with you. And I hope we can continue to work together in the future, because it's been a real blessing to our team. And we've learned a lot from the book as well, and from you.
As far as the editing review process and the final product, I don't think this product would have ever looked like this if I'd gone it alone. And thank God. Love that you were able to take these globs of words and extract what I was trying to say that was of primary importance. Verbal economy. And then the last thing is, if you're going to write a book that says, hey, suspend your ego a little bit, maybe you should practice what you preach, right? So it would be awfully ironic if I was unwilling to adapt in promoting a work that's based on the willingness to adapt and suspend our ego and listen. So thank you guys for everything. It isn't just that you came in and put the commas in the right places. You fundamentally altered the way that the book is presented and made it more digestible and more attractive. And I'm eternally grateful for that. So don't diminish your accomplishments there.
So we talked about how it seems obvious just to listen, but it's something that is missing across sectors all across the country. So tell us, what problem were you trying to solve when you were writing Listening for Value, and now we've published it and we're presenting it to the world?
My goodness. So I think it's less about one general problem. It's the way that problem manifests itself, right? If you think about it in terms of avatars that the problem takes on, and really the easiest starting point is talking about neurodiversity, because when you talk to neurodivergent people, at least some of them, they're very literal, right? And so my wife is autistic. She's very literal. I come from the South, where if you catch this fish, it's this big, right? So when you tell fish stories, when you embellish even the slightest, she takes you at face value. And we've had to have conversations about that, right? And so in my personal life, I've seen it manifest there. In work, I've seen it where people seem to be talking about following the mission, but they're not really sure what it is. On the other hand, I've seen it where your policy documents, your promotional materials, the things that Edgar Schein would call your artifacts and your values, don't match your assumptions. They don't match the behavior that you supposedly espouse. And a lot of that comes from translating what we want to be into what we're actually doing. And that takes the ability to communicate.
Yeah, very much so. And the book is a testament to all of this. And I want to go back and say too, you say, well, I wouldn't be practicing what I'm preaching or whatever if I didn't work with the team well. There's a lot of people who have a lot to say, but they don't do it, right? And so there's a big difference because you actually live it out. And I think that's important to know, because there are a lot of leaders out there who will say, do this, do that, but they don't do it themselves. But you are a shining example of somebody who does. So I think that's important too. Dr. Chambers, do you have any questions you want to ask?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about this. I had the privilege a couple of weeks ago, kind of right in the middle of the last part of the book, the last part of my part of it. I was up in Nebraska for a graduation ceremony and got to see that fox, got to see one live, actually two of them. And it was totally fascinating and unexpected. It was just going through this place, and there they were. So I snapped a couple of shots of it and sent it to Amanda and said, hey, this is where I'm standing,
Did she tell you, Jim, that last Friday a fox ran right in front of our door when Kristen walked outside first thing in the morning?
Well, it was great. I was just spellbound. I just stopped and went, okay. And then I was taking a walk down by Spring River where I fish a lot, and a mama fox and 7 babies came out and stood in front of me for about 5 minutes. And I'm like, this is too much. This is too uncanny, because I had just seen the first rendering of the cover. So anyway, we're getting off, but anyway, the whole thing was great. So when you're out there working, because I'm with Sloane, one of the great values in this book for me is the actual examples of what happened in these different kinds of organizations. And so, there's lots of lessons you can take away from that. But when you go into these organizations and you start to look at how they're not listening, just take that side of it, how they're not listening. How do you approach that with the leadership? I know you don't just go, hey, you're not listening, but you've got to approach it some way to get their attention, because they may not even realize they're not listening carefully enough.
And what I would say to that, Jim, is I talk about decision making, and decision making isn't as personal, right? And you'll notice there's tools in the books, things like the list experiment, the use of scenarios. There are all these ways to depersonalize it. So I'm not asking about you. I'm asking about what ought to be done in the situation. And that's how your values show up. So I think Another thing that I do is, and I learned this a long time ago when I was doing work with primarily with police agencies and sheriff's offices. And I don't know if you guys know, but I'm the world's leading expert on the American County Sheriff, right? Not because I'm a great scholar necessarily, but because there are just so few people that write about the sheriff. And when I went into studying the sheriff, I was expecting, Buford T. Justice and Boss Hogg and that kind of thing, the sheriff of Nottingham. And what I saw, and this is really I think if you had to think of a moment where the book started, like the genesis, I was interviewing a sheriff and I expected him to tell me that because his county board was going to ask him to raise revenue through citations, I was expecting him to go public, to litigate, to do any number of things because he had his own independent electoral constituency. And he said, look, I'm going to find a way to work with him. I talked to another sheriff who had taken over part-time 911 dispatch operations and staffed the 911 dispatch center while they were waiting on a new director and staff. It took it out of his budget, right? It took out of his overtime budget, especially. And I said, that doesn't make sense. Why did you do that? And he said, look, I'm part of a system of county government, right? If something goes wrong, it doesn't just look bad for the dispatch or the emergency management. We all look bad. So when people go to the ballot box, they're not going to remember who won a temporary battle. They're going to remember that we can't work together, that there's conflict, right? And then the final sheriff story that really hit it home. A sheriff had been approached with a request he didn't necessarily want to do, but he said, you know what, I'm going to acquiesce. I'm going to swallow my ego and I'm going to do it. I'm going to help out here. And I said, well, why? And he said, you have to decide which hill you're willing to die on, right? So if you cry wolf and say no and say everything is this giant hill, then pretty soon you lose your credibility. If, on the other hand, you are showing that you're cooperative and willing to work in the context of a system, when you say no, it means something and people do stop and listen.
Yeah, very good. Well, I know from my background working with CEOs and boards and so on, depersonalizing things is important because when you're analyzing something, you're not, from an outsider's point of view, you're not there to point fingers or whatever. And when systems break down, when internal systems fray in some way, it's very easy to point your finger at some person, some tool in there or whatever, rather than, and what I was impressed by in the manuscript is this kind of global view of listening on all accounts, kind of I know this old school, but 360 kind of let's listen to everything and see what's going on, and see where the breakdowns are coming from, or if there hasn't been a breakdown yet. I know in my work with banks and hospitals and stuff, you're trying to anticipate breakdowns in communication and so on. So that was impressive to me. I thought having this broader global perspective of listening and then not pointing fingers and saying, oh, well, it's because of this person or that person, whatever. And where I'm going with that is it's a systemic issue within the organization. It's not the one person. And the fact that you're able to look at that and talk about that in the book in some very concrete ways, I thought was extremely helpful for me, just reading it.
The way I think about that is it's kind of like mold on the assembly line at the barrel factory, right? We often talk about the bad apples. Phil Zimbardo talks about this in his Lucifer effect. He says, how do normal people engage in evil, right? And they do it because, first off, it becomes banal, it becomes routine, and they lose a lot of their sense of agency. They de-individuate, they often are anonymous in uniform, that sort of thing. And he says what happens is we often blame the bad apples for things like the abuses at Abu Ghraib, when in fact we ought to look at the barrels, right? The organizations, and we also ought to look at the barrel makers, the systems that are allowing the organizations to, in turn, allow this behavior to occur. And I think if we look at that, then we realize we can't just pin all of our organization's problems on one pariah, right? One Boo Ridley and go home, because we're going to go back one person less and still have the same problems.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think the way you address that in there in the book, I know for me, I'm reading it for editorial purposes, but I'm also reading it as someone who works with those organizations. And I can see how helpful it would be for a CEO, any manager, but any C-level person to get a broader, more global perspective on listening to systems. I'll throw in one little quick story and we'll get back to it. But I was working with a very large international bank, and with the Treasury Department was having terrible customer problems. In this department, they transferred money. They, like you send me some Japanese yen and I'm going to trade it for something else, right? And so it's a back and forth making money by trading currencies. So there's this huge problem, and they're losing lots and lots of money every day, and they don't know what the problem is. And so we're in there trying to figure out where it's at. If you get myopic, you're looking at the computer system, you're looking at the way, how things are rolling through, how the information comes in, is it processed, so on and so on. In this case, by taking a broader view, we were able to identify where the trades weren't happening. So trades were coming in, instructions to trade, and then they weren't getting traded. So, millions of dollars were being lost, and then the bank's having to make up for the loss because it's a problem. But taking that global look, if I'd have had this book, quite honestly, and I'm not, just saying this, but if I'd have had this book, I would have had a different point of view going in there. And we did eventually find the problem and fix it, but it took a lot longer than if I would have had this, and some of the tools that you provide would have allowed me to help that client much more quickly identify where the issue was and how to grasp it. But because we weren't listening to some of the things that were happening, we took things for granted. And I think that's something you hit on really well in the book. Be careful not to take things for granted. You may be smart. There's a lot of smart people in the world, but you may not be that smart. If you listen, you can learn a lot.
Absolutely. And the other idea that you're hitting on is one that I learned from Al Shalloway. The idea that when you locally optimize, and academia in its modern sort of esoteric 3 people read my articles kind of world has become the epitome of this, right? We have people who specialize so much so that there are only 3 other people who can understand them, right? And local optimization leads to a situation. If you guys are familiar with Aaron Tippin, the old country singer, he had this song years ago called "There Ain't Nothing Wrong with the Radio." And in it, he describes this car. It's got bald tires. It's blowing all kinds of nasty stuff out of the tailpipe. It's not running, but he says, "Man, I've got dual antennas. I can get any station. And I've got these big speakers, right?" And I see that right in high school. I remember seeing so many people, myself included, with a $500 car with maybe a $1,500 sound system. And what we realize is that if we focus so much on local optimization, we end up not just doing so at the expense of the whole, right? We also tend to add unnecessary features, right? And in the context of a book, that's words, right? Verbal economy is not something that academics are trained to do. And that's why, again, working with you, having Sloane, having Amanda, and then having your expertise and real world insights, I think that was a good gauntlet for me, right? Because if I can clear your gauntlet and you say, "Hey, this might actually be useful," then that gives me a little more confidence that it's going to be used. And the way that you help to refine and extract those things to make them more useful is something that I'm really grateful for.
Well, it's good. I know it's good for me it's a good read for me.
There you go.
So one of the things that I wanted to speak to that you and Dr. Chambers have both talked about here, you both there with your doctorate degrees and us not, but one thing that I think is so important truly about this book is that it speaks to all of us, right? No matter what level you're at. You don't have to be high level, executive, C-suite to read this book and it come through. I can read it. I can understand it. It makes sense to me. I can implement it with my team, and so on and so forth. And I think that there's not really, honestly, in my opinion, a level that can't sit down with this book and read it, especially because of the way that we chose as a team to lay it out, because each different individual chapter, and we've already had some people attest to this, gives us all the resources and all the information we need. And I think that it was just a really cool collaboration between all of us to come together. Because at first it seemed a little weird, and we were like, well, I don't know about this. But then when we really got into it, we're like, this really works. This is good. This helps everybody. Because for those in academia, all of you guys who are so smart and far above, it's good because you have everything you need right there that you would normally be looking for anyways. And then for those of us who may not always be looking for those extra references, they're right there and go, oh, okay, I wouldn't even have thought about to look for that. So I think that makes it extra special in that way as well. I do want you to talk a little bit about appreciative inquiry and how that shaped the book.
Yeah. So I guess to sort of preface before we get to the other AI, which is what I'm thinking is a great marketing tool for the book.
Right.
So when we talk about the things that you're discussing in terms of accessibility of the book, if we look at the heart of the book, the middle chapters of the book, we talk a lot about community-based participatory action research, having stories as living data sets that people tell in ways that we can't measure with our traditional metrics. And I think Dr. Chambers did a great job of explaining this doesn't come at the expense of quantitative methodology and metrics, right? It can be used in qualitative techniques can be used to triangulate existing quantitative methods. And then in the book, we have several variables and ways that you can quantify them to measure them, just like you would things like delays or impediments in your value streams. And that comes from my work as a mixed modal methodologist. In my work, I have published high-end survey data research. I've published interview research, focus group research, ethnography, right? So I learned at an early time that the dichotomy between quantitative and qualitative methodology was a false dichotomy. And I think that if we look at any dichotomy, that's what we're saying. And so if we say a book is for some people and not for others, right, that defeats the whole purpose of this book. And I want it to be challenging. I want people to think critically, but I don't want them to have trouble understanding the challenges that are being presented. And I think that's where you guys came in. You were able to take my desire and my aspiration and translate it into a document that serves that purpose. And then, so with appreciative inquiry, so beginning at the community level, my approach to appreciative inquiry isn't the kind that you see in a therapist's office, right? Mine starts with community. It starts with what is your role, not just as an individual, but in the system? What is the system doing that you appreciate? What is the system doing that you don't? And then looking around, even if we have people that disagree with us, right? We're always going to have people disagree with us. And thank goodness, because if we don't, we're not going to learn anything. If I surround myself in an echo chamber, I'm going to get confirmation bias, but I'm never going to be challenged. I'm never going to be grow. We can see that in scholarship. We can see that in parenthood. We can see that in faith traditions, right? So many areas of our lives, lifting weights, nutrition, whatever. There's so many areas where discipline and commitment really do make a difference. And if we're attuned to these things, I think it doesn't mean that we have to become softies, right? I don't think we all have to go and start giving everybody hugs all the time, but I've had some people react to the book that way. They said, "Well, I don't have time to be a therapist, right? I'm a scrum master." And I get that, right? But you're being asked to try very small experiments to develop communication that don't require some sort of boo-hoo session. But if boo-hoo sessions help you and your team align, go for it. And where that comes down to is stop being afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
Let me say this here. So one of the things that comes out in the book is the fact that anecdotal information has extreme value, but you have to listen. You can't, not everything. Let's say you're in a scrum meeting, which we've both been in more than our share. A lot of times project leaders, project managers, scrum leaders, they're not interested in anecdotal information. And especially, let's say you're working with a large system of software integration, that kind of thing, where it's a lot of technical stuff going on. And you have these scrum meetings and someone has some anecdotal information, a story about what's happening, and they don't have all the data set to back it up. They don't have a lot of hard data, but this is happening to them every day. I saw this a lot in hospital systems. You know, these nurses are the reason you're alive is because of a nurse, not because of a doctor. And so these nurses had anecdotal information that would often just be pushed aside. Yeah, she talks a lot. He talks a lot. We're not interested in those stories. We're only interested in the data itself of what's happening in the software. And you can really miss a lot. And I think one of the values of the book is you really highlight the fact that anecdotal information, regardless of where it comes from, I'm not saying you're not supposed to filter it, right? You got to filter it. You got to be a leader. You got to pay attention. It's not a crybaby session. But when anecdotal information comes up in a Scrum meeting or in any kind of meeting, if you're listening, you might hear something deeper. And that's what I like about, go a little deeper. Don't just take the surface level. Try to listen, ask more questions, dive into it a little bit, and find out what's really going on. Because these people are on the front lines. They may know a whole lot more than you think they do.
Well, sure. And I think, too, if you're willing to listen for patterns that emerge in the anecdotes,
Right.
what you might notice is that your product owner and your business analyst aren't using the same terms, but they're certainly describing the same problem. And once they're able to realize that, they can work together a little better, right? So in those daily stand-ups where you're asking the 3 questions, it might be that some people say, hey, I'm being blocked by X, Y, or Z, but it's really a manifestation of the same thing. And that's where root cause analysis, 5 whys, all these lean techniques come in, because a lot of times problems, again, manifest themselves with different avatars, but we go down to the same source, right?
That's one of the things that I really like too, is that you said listening can serve as an early warning system. And I really like that, because that's one of the returns. If you're listening early, you can avoid some of these crisis situations. Another thing that you touch on, and I'd like to hear more about that, is listening to your neurodivergent colleagues they can recognize the tension, right? Or the disruption in pattern before other colleagues would, and how listening to them is even better. So just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's one example of how bringing a diverse team together doesn't just benefit us for the sake of diversity. It benefits us because we are able to understand perspectives that we otherwise wouldn't be able to. With neurodivergent folks, that's a great example. We tend to be more alert when it comes to perceiving sensory information, right? And that might mean that a neurodivergent person, going back to evolution, it might be the reason we're alive, because they were able to pick the red berry that wasn't going to kill us instead of the one that would, right? And we think about that beyond neurodiversity. We think in other contexts. If I have somebody who has lived experience from an area I want to do business, I am going to have value from that person, right? Being able to communicate culture. When I'm working with my teams in West Africa, thank gosh I have people who are in Ghana and Nigeria who can tell me, hey, a restaurant fundraiser is a really dumb idea for this area, right? When I go at them and I'm like, hey, I did this restaurant fundraiser with the VP MMA for veterans and it was awesome. Let's do it in Nigeria. And they're like, Casey, we don't have that. We don't have that. We don't do that. That's not something we do here. When I went in with my metrics for that same group, I had 2 primary outcome variables. I was looking at social capital and I was looking at self-efficacy. And I saw social capital really shot up with the group. Self-efficacy just sort of flatlined. And I'm looking and trying to figure this out. And I sit down with the team and they said, hey, there's one word that explains this. And that word is Ubuntu, right? And the idea in West African philosophy is I exist because everybody else does, right? So there is no, I'm achieving greater than you, I'm better than you, I'm comparing myself with you. And I think a lot of times in the West, when we think about self-efficacy, that's the root of it is, am I efficacious in the sense that I can compete with somebody else? In their minds, they talked about what they had learned from each other, how they had grown together. So that social capital was something that already existed in their culture and could be built on, whereas the other stuff wasn't as useful. If I had gone in and not known that, I might have put way too much focus on an area that they didn't believe was useful. So just being willing to listen and adjust metrics and And I think sometimes we can talk about difficult things without talking about them directly. When I talk about, I studied sheriffs and police chiefs for over 20 years, and my primary area of focus was accountability. I never use the word accountability. I talk about managing expectations. I give them scenarios, right? Because if we present something with a certain word or tone, often we shut people down, right away. When we can ask them about something in a way that's more approachable and maybe more empathetic.
Yeah, and considering their surroundings or considering the situation that they're in at the time. Sometimes it's really, really important to talk about this too, is being aware of those things, the person's personality, where are they at this particular moment, what's going on. But I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Sloane, I know that you really, really have grown on this project so much. You kind of came in just before we started this project. You and Dr. LaFrance have had a lot of back and forth, and you guys have built a great relationship as well, which I'm so happy about. So I just want to hear a little bit more from you. You have questions for him? Else you want to say? Because I know this has been a great growth project for you. I think like our first real big project that we've all worked on together. So
It was, and it was a great one to get my feet wet. It was just, here I am. I'm starting out with IOL Global, learning about director of operations, and my CEO says, "Hey, we're editing a whole book. It's written, it's ready to go." And I thought, what? A whole book? I signed on for social media, but it's been it's great to see how all of it, we all can work together, but all of those different parts, like, pre-promoting the book, right? And so we see the success in that, but it was a great project. As I read the book, I began to strongly, I'm like, this is it. And I've recommended it to people, and it's great because, again, framework agnostic, sector agnostic, anybody can pick this up. You don't have to have a C-level title. You don't have to be in charge anywhere. You can be improved by improving your listening, right? And so then you can improve whatever organization or community you are involved with. But I do want to ask you, so looking back on the process, who helped make this book possible, and what would you want them to know?
Well, let me rewind to the last thing you said before that. I think the one thing I want to impress upon people is using this approach is something you can use for personal growth and development, right?
mm-hmm.
Being more present focused, right? If you're going to be listening, then if I'm effectively listening, I'm not doing two things. I'm not living in the past and regretting something, and I'm not living in the future and worrying about something. I'm living in the moment where I can perceive reality to the extent that my senses allow me to, right? And I would say a lot of that is stuff that I've learned just in my own personal growth and development, my own faith walk, my family. So there's so many people. If I started to thank people, I don't think I would ever finish. But there were people who were instrumental, right? You guys are obviously included there. My family is. I can't even begin to describe, and you know what happens when I start there. So I'm gonna I'm gonna
I think
keep the
she was trying to make
waterworks
you
down.
cry again. She's trying to make you cry again. I can't.
But no, I think just there's so many people. Joel Carboni at Green Project Management, Al Shalloway, all the sustainability champions. There's just so many people who have given me different vantage points, and I've studied a lot of different frameworks, models, approaches across change, project, agile, whatever. At the heart of it, it comes down to how effectively are we able to get together and decide on what we're doing and respond to change if we need to, and be transparent about that, right? If we can do that, 90% of our problems, we're going to still have problems. Nothing's a panacea or a silver bullet. But if we can do that, I wouldn't say 90%, but a lot of our problems will go away, or at least be more approachable. And maybe we don't want our problems to go away. We want to feel like we can do something about them.
Yeah, we can solve them. And I think that's what I was gonna say, is like this book is a problem solver. It helps you think through in your own get in your own head. Can I work through this? How can I listen to somebody else in this? How can I again be appreciative of what the other person's situation is? It's a really beautiful testament. It's an extreme honor to work with you on it, to learn so much and to grow. All right, so I'll ask you the last question, then we'll kind of round robin it and make sure that we hit everything we could in this short amount of time. But we asked you, on the last podcast, what legacy do you hope you lead? And if you haven't heard that, you need to go listen to it. But we're going to ask it a little bit differently this time. What legacy do you hope this book, Listening for Value, leaves for leaders and organizations in the field of project management, but outside of there as well?
I don't want to overstate the book's importance, but if it does what it's supposed to do, it will serve as a little bit of a Rosetta Stone, right? It'll help to bridge people who are really good with stats, with numbers, with data, but maybe aren't as good at translating that into relationships, into communication, right? And it's going to be helpful, I'm hoping, at getting folks to understand that these things that we see as soft have hard dollars attached to them, right? And it's not just about creating an environment where we're kind to each other, but I think if there is one thing you could take about the book, listening for value means that you're respecting someone enough to be kind to them. And that stands in stark opposition to what we were taught and peddled and sold sometimes, that we have to be nice, right? And I think it's a good way for us to understand that kindness comes from being able to be present with somebody, whereas being nice is giving them the answer, nodding at them, maybe even say, "Oh yeah, right," in the same way that you might a kid that you were trying to dismiss. If I take the time to really look at you in the eye and say, "Hey, let's talk about this," even if I don't get what I want, I feel like I matter to you. And a lot of times, and I know that as a parent now, a lot of times when my baby's crying, it's not because she wants something, it's because she needs my attention.
Yeah.
She needs me to be able to show her, "Hey, you matter to me." And we're not all kids, right? And I'm not trying to infantilize the workforce, but we need to know that we're needed. And if you tell me I'm needed and that my work is bringing value, it's going to give me more motivation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sloane and I had a conversation about that not long ago, so I agree with that as well. All right, Dr. Chambers, Sloane, you have any other questions? Anything else you want to go over?
No, it's just a real honor to be on the project. I enjoyed it immensely. I think it's going to add value for a long time going forward. From the academic side, we're always excited when someone adds more knowledge to our knowledge base about something. For me, this is a real value add to the whole world of communication, project management, particularly. I can see that happening, and all the other sectors that it wouldn't be involved with. So I'm grateful that you took the time. It's not easy doing this, and someone who might be listening to this, like, "Oh yeah, we'll just hire somebody and they'll help me get through this." It's a tough process, and that's why not everyone can do it. But I think I appreciate the fact that you took time out of your busy life to sit down, put your thoughts on paper, and hammer this out over a number of years till you got to the point where we can present it to the public. And that's going to have a lasting legacy of value for the rest of us. So I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was an honor to work on this project and continue to see you have success in this. I'm so glad. Every copy you sell means someone else is reading this, right? And sharing and taking part in this journey of listening. And I'm so excited. You said you didn't want to overstate the importance of the book. I don't think you can overstate the importance of this book and the material in it. I think that's impossible. I think we all have a lot to learn about listening every day. I think this is definitely a book that, even though I've already read it twice, I'm going to return to annually because I need to be reminded. But the last thing, just a quick question for the team. Where is everybody getting their Fennec Fox tattoo?
It's so funny. Last night, I was laying in bed and I said, "Hey, Kristen, I think I might get a fox tattoo." And I said, "But I'll only get it if you get one to match." And she said, "Well, I guess you're not getting it." So,
So there's your answer then.
No,
Nobody.
I just gotta
Kristen
wait.
has spoken.
I just gotta wait 16 years, and then Letty can get one with me.
There you
Right.
go. There you go. Yeah.
We could get a T-shirt. We could
That
get
might-
it.
There you go.
We sent him a blanket, so that should
Oh my
suffice.
gosh,
for a while.
that blanket has not left my daughter's sight since it got here. She loved
Well,
it.
that's good. I'm glad she likes it then. Yeah, so I think we have, well, I hope we have some more projects that we're going to work on along the lines. We're not going to give it all away, but we have some more things in the pipeline that go along with the book. And so that's really exciting too. I mean, it was a really big milestone for us to get to this point, and now we can kind of work on forward. And we were all kind of learning how to work with one another and how to work on this project together. we all have such diverse backgrounds, but all similarities as well. And so it was a lot of fun getting just in together in the weeds as a team and learning more about this subject matter, learning more about the subject matter of publishing and editing and proofreading and tech editing, because we've all done a little bit of that here and there, or a lot of that here and there, but bringing together an entire team, I can now see that there's value in that, because we're not just listening to one person or the other. We're having a whole entourage of information that we can kind of massage with and make a really, really beautiful product. So it's been a blast. So excited for what we're getting ready to do next. So excited to just be a strategic partner with you and to have the connections with you. It is no small feat to get something like this done, and you have been phenomenal to work with. I cannot say that enough. So if you don't follow Dr. LaFrance on LinkedIn, you absolutely should. He puts out some exceptional information, education material. Some of it's on information regarding the book. Some of it's on other information. So you should certainly follow him. And yeah, just thank you so much. We'll put your information down. We'll, of course, put the link to the book. I think one thing I want to say too before we go, one thing that's really, really powerful to me is I know for a fact, and this is not lip service, that the sale of this book means no difference to you whatsoever. It's getting the information out to people that they can utilize it in what they're working on or in their everyday life. That's the important factor. It's not the sales factor. So
we were talking about the foxes. I'd said Kristen saw a fox the day the book came out, and Dr. Chambers had seen some foxes. At the beginning of this project, we were talking, I think it was the first time I met Dr. Chambers, and he mentioned Laura Bradley Park in Peoria, right? And I had been there the weekend before because I was there every weekend. Right. And I think it's just these little God shots along the way. Absolutely. That it's the only way to describe it. Like, God's just giving you a confirmation that you've chosen the right people to work with. And then you see what happens, right?
Yeah. It's been beautiful. It's been a great ride. And thank you for your patience with us too. And I know it took a while there in the beginning because I was just still trying to put the pieces of things together. So
everything works at the perfect time.
Absolutely. It did. It absolutely did. And we're so grateful. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on with us again. I'm sure we're going to see you back on here again.
Sounds good.
So thank you. I appreciate it. And Dr. Chambers and Sloane, thanks for being on with us today as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all so much.